It was one of those nights when the rain was pouring relentlessly and the streets were covered in darkness. I was home alone, a decision I was starting to regret. My parents were out of town for the weekend, leaving me in charge of the house. The weather outside was very bad. The rain didn't seem to stop, and the wind was making a loud, scary sound, like someone was screaming far away. I've always enjoyed the sound of rain, but tonight it felt different, like the sky was crying out for a warning. It was midnight. I was trying to watch some old movies to distract my mind from those scary wind noises, but strange noises outside kept catching my attention. The lights had also flickered twice, making me nervous. Every creak, every sound of thunder seemed louder than it should be. Just when I was scrolling through my phone, I heard it, a faint knock at the front door. It was soft, like someone was hesitant to knock. I thought I might have imagined it. But then it came again, louder this time, and my heart started pounding. Who could possibly be knocking at this hour, especially in this weather? I silently walked towards the door, looking through the peephole, but there was no one. I stood there, waiting, hoping it was just my mind playing tricks. But then the knock came again. This time followed by a scratchy, dragging sound against the door. It sent chills down my spine. I slowly unlocked the door and cracked it open, just enough to peek outside. There was no one at the door, just the rainwater was falling from the roof and collecting on the stairs. As I was about to close the door, my eyes caught something, a soaked, crumpled piece of paper on the doorstep. I picked it up hesitantly. The ink was smudged, but I could still read out the words, "Let me in." I quickly slammed the door shut and locked it. Was this some kind of sick joke? I double-checked all the locks and windows, making sure everything was secure. I tried to convince myself it was just some neighborhood kids messing around, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I went back to the living room, trying to calm myself, and then the lights flickered again. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the kitchen to check the circuit breaker. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. Soft, deliberate footsteps coming from the hallway behind me. I froze. I knew I was alone. I turned around slowly, shining the flashlight down the dark hallway, but there was nothing, just an empty corridor. I took a step forward and the footsteps stopped. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized the sound wasn't echoing from another room. It was right behind me. I turned around and the beam of my flashlight landed on something that made my blood run cold. Standing just a few feet away was a shadow, drenched in rainwater, with long wet hair covering its face. I could barely see its eyes, but I felt them staring right at me. I stumbled back, the flashlight flickering in my shaking hands. "Who are you?" I shouted in my shaky voice. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, dripping water onto the floor, and then, in a creepy whisper, it repeated the words from the note.
"Let me in."
Let me in. I ran towards the living room, slamming the kitchen door behind me. I fumbled with my phone, trying to call the police, but the screen kept glitching. It was like something was interfering with it. I heard someone's wet footsteps approaching the door. I felt scared. I quickly put a chair under the doorknob to block it, praying it would keep him out. The rain got heavier and the house felt colder. I heard soft whispering sounds coming from the walls, like a group of people asking for something. Then the footsteps stopped and it was quiet. I put my ear against the door to listen, but I couldn't hear anything. Maybe whatever was there had left, I thought. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw the living room window fogging up. I slowly turned to look, and my heart almost stopped. Someone had written words on the glass using the fog. "I'm already inside." Panic surged through me. I grabbed a knife from the kitchen counter to protect myself, but when I looked around, I couldn't see anyone. The whispering grew louder, appearing to come from all directions. I ran away into the hallway, trying to escape the sound, but it was like the walls were speaking to me. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the house into complete darkness. My flashlight flickered one last time before dying off, leaving me blind and helpless. Then, I heard someone breathing heavily like they were struggling, coming from the end of the hall. I couldn't see anything, but I could feel them getting closer and closer. I turned and ran, trying to find a way out. I stumbled through the darkness, trying to escape. I reached the front door and opened it, but all I saw was the dark night and the rain pouring down. I didn't know what to do, go out into the storm or stay inside with the thing that scared me. But then I felt a cold hand gripping my shoulder. I screamed and turned around, but there was no one there. I ran out into the rain, sprinting down the driveway without looking back. I didn't stop until I reached the street. Then I turned around to look at the house, thinking I would see the figure staring back at me from the window. But the house was just standing there, dark and quiet, like nothing had happened at all. The next morning, my parents came home. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. They said it was just a bad dream, blaming the storm in my imagination. But I knew what I saw, what I heard. I knew it was real. And when I went back inside, I found the wet footprints on the kitchen floor still there, leading to the exact spot where I had seen the figure standing. It hasn't rained since that night, but I can't shake the feeling that whatever was outside might not have left. The next night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard it again, a faint, hesitant knock on the door. And this time, it wasn't raining. I remember that night clearly, one of those rainy evenings when the clouds seemed to be raining non-stop. The sky was barely visible through the thick sheets of rain. I was working a late shift as an Uber driver, trying to earn some extra money before the weekend. The streets were almost empty, and the few cars that passed by splashed a lot of water. My windshield wipers were moving fast, trying to clear the raindrops, and my headlights were struggling to shine through the fog. I was driving along an unusually quiet street when my phone buzzed. I got a new ride request. The pickup location was in a neighborhood I didn't know well, so I had to navigate through dark, dimly lit roads to get there. When I arrived at my location, I noticed the street was eerily quiet. The rain was pounding on my car's roof, making a steady beat that felt weird and scary. There, I saw my rider coming towards me. They came out of the darkness, holding a big umbrella that wasn't doing much to keep them dry. They were wearing dark clothes and a hat that hid their face. I couldn't see any of their faces clearly. "Hello?" I called out with a forced smile. The rider nodded and slowly got into the back seat of my car. They didn't say a word, which made me feel a bit uneasy. The only sounds were the rain pounding against the roof and the occasional loud sound of thunder. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I caught a quick glimpse of their pale face before they turned away, adding to the eerie atmosphere. The GPS took me on a never-ending, curvy road. The rain turned the streets into flowing rivers, and flashes of lightning lit up the dark landscape in scary bursts. The windshield wipers worked hard to clear the water, but the glass fogged up with every breath I took. I tried to talk to my passengers, but they didn't respond, making the atmosphere in the car feel chillier and serious. Their silence was unsettling, and I couldn't help but wonder who this mysterious person was and where we were headed on this stormy night. "Where to?" I asked, trying to break the silence. Finally, my passenger spoke up in a whisper voice. "Just keep driving." I kept driving, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of concern that grew stronger with every mile. The road got smaller and smaller, with thick, crooked trees that seemed to lean closer to the car, as if trying to listen in on our conversation. The storm just got worse and worse, with no end in sight. The rain came down harder and harder, pounding against the windows like a never-ending drumbeat. It was like the storm was trying to trap us. I gripped the wheel tightly, my heart racing with every snap of thunder and flash of lightning. Suddenly, the car's headlights began to flicker and then went out entirely. The only light came from the occasional lightning bolt, casting ghostly shadows on the road. I tried restarting the engine, but it was no use. I was trapped, surrounded by the storm and the oppressive silence of my mysterious passenger. "Do you have a flashlight?" I asked in my shaky voice. The passenger remained eerily quiet. I could sense their eyes staring at me, but I dared not turn around. Instead, I searched the glove compartment for anything that might help. As I dug through it, the rain grew louder and the temperature inside the car dropped. Just then, a flash of lightning illuminated the interior of my car, and for a split second, I saw the passenger's face clearly. His eyes were hollow, with a chilling expression that showed no emotions at all. I was paralyzed with fear. My blood ran cold. "What do you want?" I asked in my shaky voice. "We're almost there." "Just keep driving," the passenger replied. The storm seemed to get worse and worse, the wind howling around us. The trees outside were like dancers in a crazy storm, and the car was hit with flying debris. The wipers were ineffective, and I could barely see anything. Then the storm ended up. The heavy rain turned into a light drizzle, and the strong wind became calm. I can now see the road clearly again, and the headlights flickered back to life. I sighed in relief, but then I heard a scary laugh coming from the back seat. I looked in the rearview mirror, but the back seat was empty. I hit the brakes hard and turned around, but the back seat was empty. I only saw the passenger's umbrella on the wet seat. My heart was racing like crazy as I took a deep breath, trying to calm down. Suddenly, my phone buzzed with a new message. I looked at it, and my blood ran cold. It was a text from an unknown number, with a single line, "Thanks for the ride." The GPS pinged, indicating that I had reached my destination. I looked around, but there was nothing but darkness. The whole area seemed abandoned. The once familiar surroundings were now unfamiliar and menacing. I quickly got out of the car and tried to call the Uber support line, but there was no signal. I was completely alone. As I walked back to the car, a new message popped up on my phone. It was a video of me from inside the car, taken during the ride. In the background, I could see the passenger's ghostly face, staring directly into the camera with a chilling, empty smile. The final frame showed the text, "You're not alone." I froze. My mind stopped working. As I drove away, the rain started again, just as heavy as before. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see that haunting figure again. Every drive after that felt different, with every shadow and every sound making me jump. I could never shake the feeling that something was always just behind me, waiting. The rain never seemed to wash away the fear, and the storm that night had left more than just a chill in the air. And every time I hear the rain, I can't help but wonder if it's calling me back to that dark, twisted road. Because sometimes, I feel like that passenger never truly left. I was working the night shift at the hospital, a job I had been doing for years but still couldn't get used to. The rain was relentless that night, hammering against the windows like it wanted to get inside. The sound was noisy, echoing through the empty hallways and making everything feel colder and lonelier. I wrapped my sweater tightly around me. It wasn't just the weather. There was something in the air, something that made me feel like I shouldn't be here. It was 2:30 a.m., and the emergency room was strangely quiet. A few patients were resting in the waiting area, and the occasional cough echoed down the hallway. I was in the nurses' station, trying to keep busy, but the flickering lights were giving me a headache. I looked at the clock, but the time seemed to be moving at a snail's pace. Suddenly, the lights flickered again and went out, but didn't come back on right away. I stared at the dim emergency lights that were switched on, casting weird shadows on the walls. The sound of the rain increased, and for a moment I felt completely alone. I could see the buzzing of the lights struggling to stay on, and it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Something felt wrong in the hospital, like the building itself was alive and watching me. I decided to take a walk around, to keep myself awake and shake off the fear growing inside me. As I walked down the hallway, the sound of my footsteps echoed back at me, and each step felt heavier than the last. I passed by empty patient rooms, their doors slightly open, with shadows moving in the corners of my eyes. As I reached the end of the hallway, I noticed a strange flicker of light coming from room 304, a room that should have been empty. I stopped, trying to remember if I had left any lights on in there, but I was sure I hadn't. My heart started beating faster, and I felt a strong urge to go back, but I kept moving forward. I told myself it was just a faulty light, trying to calm my nerves. I slowly pushed the door open, and the sight inside made me freeze. The room was dark except for the faint glow of a small lamp. The bed, which had been empty earlier, now had a patient in it, a woman, her face pale and eyes closed. I blinked, trying to recall if I had missed something, but I was sure no new patients had been admitted. The woman's appearance was strange. She was wearing an old-fashioned hospital gown, the kind we hadn't used in decades, and her long, wet hair was spread across the pillow like she had just been brought in from the rain. I moved closer, and the air felt colder. The woman wasn't breathing, and her face looked like she was in pain. At first, I wanted to check her pulse, but something held me back. There was a bad smell, like mold and something rotten. I leaned in closer, trying to ignore the scary feeling that was growing inside me. That's when her eyes snapped open. They were wide and vacant, staring right through me, and her lips began to move without making a sound. I stumbled back, nearly stumbling over my own feet, as the light in the room began to flicker. She started to whisper, her voice barely audible over the rain, but I heard a few words. "He's coming. Don't let him in." Before I could react, the lights in the room went out completely, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the door. The whispers turned into a low hum, like a chant, and I could feel the vibrations in my bones. I finally managed to grab the door handle and pulled it open, started running back into the hallway. The rain was louder now, almost deafening, and I could hear faint footsteps approaching. But when I looked, no one was there. I ran back to the nurse's station. My colleague, Lisa, was there, looking at me with confusion. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." I tried to catch my breath, pointing back down the hallway. "There's a woman in room 304. She's not supposed to be there." Lisa stared back at me and took a flashlight. We both went back to the room. I was trying to figure out what I saw, but when we got there, the room was empty. There was no one in the bed, no lamp, nothing. The bed was neat and tidy, and there were no signs of anyone ever being there. Lisa looked at me concerned. "Are you sure you saw someone?" I nodded and said, "She was there, Lisa. She said something about not letting someone in." Lisa's face went pale. "You've heard the stories, don't you, about the man in the rain?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, and she was looking nervous. I had heard the staff talking about it, but I never believed it. It was just a scary story, right? They said that during heavy rain, a man in a wet black coat would appear, searching for lost souls to take with him. Patients and staff had reported seeing him over the years, always during the rain, always when the lights flickered. Just then, we heard footsteps coming from the hallway. They were slow and heavy. We turned to look, and that's when we saw him. A tall, dark figure stood at the end of the hall, just out of reach of the dim emergency lights. His face was hidden under a wide-brimmed hat, and his coat was dripping wet, with water pooling on the floor around him. Lisa grabbed my arm and pulled me back. "Don't look at him," she whispered in her shaky voice. "He's not real. Just don't look." But it was too late. He slowly turned his head towards us. Even though I couldn't see his eyes, I knew he was looking straight at me. The hallway seemed to shrink, making him feel closer than he really was. The figure moved closer, and I heard a squelching sound as his wet boots touched the floor. Lisa pulled me back, breaking my focus, and we started running. We didn't stop until we reached the elevator. We kept pressing the button until the doors opened. As we got in, I saw the figure standing in the hallway, water falling from his coat, not moving at all, before the doors closed. The elevator ride felt like forever. When we reached the lobby, the sound of the rain was quieter, but the weird feeling didn't leave. The next morning, as the sun finally rose through the stormy clouds, We checked the records. There was no one admitted to room 304 that night, and the security cameras showed nothing. No woman, no figure in the rain, nothing. Since then, I haven't worked a night shift, and every time it rains, I feel a creepy vibe. I can't imagine what the woman whispered. He's coming. Don't let him in. And now every time I hear the rain, I wonder if he's out there, waiting for someone else to see him, waiting to be let in. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed these true, terrifying stories, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss scary stories that will keep you up at night.